Namaskar. Good afternoon. This is Purnima from state of Wisconsin, and from I Exit, Indian exiting leftist to conservative values. Today we have Aabhas Maldahiyar, and briefly to introduce him to you is he's actually a professional architect, urban designer, ex-communist, and he is an author, and we're extremely fortunate to have him here. And we want to talk about communism because he has lived it. He actually knows a lot more about what he saw and how our Indic culture shifted his thought process. And he now is a staunch nationalist and advocates about our Indic values. And we totally believe that as an Indian American, if we could bring our lessons, our histories, and knowledge to you, to the world, what's the danger of communism is, I hope, and we all hope, that we can actually stop this massacre going forward in America. We have gone through enough in India as a Hindu communities in India. So welcome, Aabhasji. Thank you so much for being here with us and giving us your valuable time. And let's start with a fundamental question. As an ex-communist, what did you learn and what pulled you to communism?
Namaskar to all of you. So this is a very pertinent question, and somehow with the time, though I have answered this question multiple times, but every time, whatever experiences I gain in the days to come, this answer gets even furthermore refined. Because furthermore, I have been exposed to what actually communism is. Though I have left the fold of communism, I am being exploring more into communism now, and I'm seeing that what a menace it is and what it is supposed to bring to the earth, if I say, or whole human civilization. So, me being falling into trap of communism, I call it a trap, and I call it a trap because somehow the way the communist functions, or somehow the propagators of communism function, it's set in a way that if you are someone very innocent, a person who has some aspiration to do good for the country, society, people, the world, globe, for anywhere, then there are very high chances that you will get trapped into it. And it also happens that if you have certain kind of disassociation with your traditional values, and then it's for certain that you will fall in trap of it. And my journey was somewhat on very much on this line, and somehow being Hindu at times comes as an advantage and at times comes at a disadvantage too. When I say this, many people will have their eyebrows frowning upward, but yes, being Hindu also at times has acted as a disadvantage for us. The reason being that somehow we have not been very adherent to our tradition, our values, because Hindu society as such is a very open society. Perhaps it is the only society in the world which is so open to the ideas. It is not going to bash you for blasphemy or anything as such. So I come from a very multicultural family. The left propaganda, or perhaps I must say that architecture school are the places where the left ideas cook up very strongly, because it gets amalgamated with the architecture education, which is not Indian in nature. At the same time, it's coated with the layer of freedom of expression, where every student is trying to do something different, go beyond the limits. And at the same time, if you are a bit off from your tradition, like I had been diverted a bit from my tradition of the Hindu Dharma, so the thing further started getting dirtier or mucky for me. I started falling in the trap of communism. Or our architecture education was about understanding how the Western ideas of architecture work. In fact, the most interesting part was that if at all a student would come up with the idea of Vastu Shastra for his design concept, then he would be ridiculed. But if a student has drawn some inspiration from Arabia and talking about the Islamic architecture and design concept, he would be appreciated. So, and of course, if you're copying the ideas from the Western architecture, then further it was more appreciated. There was no talk about the magnificent Indian architecture which exists. In reality, Indian architecture is perhaps the most fabulous one on the globe, if I have to speak. And so this disconnect started dancing. And further, I was exposed to the literature because I had interest in reading. And of course, my father was a historian and he had given me enough input of academic history. And somehow, academic history will always disorient you from what the reality is. And even now, I have a lot of disagreement with my father, but we discuss a lot of things. And though in my childhood, I also used to see the two very different faces of my father. Like when you were sitting in the, I come from a place called Hazaribagh in Jharkhand. It's a small town, and in the summers we used to go to the terrace and we would see the stars and the constellations and the things. And then he would tell the story of Saptarishi and many such things. But there was different face of father altogether when he would tell about the academic history. He would talk about, yes, Aryan invasion is spoken about. He will speak about what exactly the hoax of Aryan Dravidian is. And he will not call it hoax, but he will say that, Aryans and Dravidian. So all these issues were put into me. Then of course I grew up with the perception that everyone who invaded us were somehow very great, whether it's Akbar the Great or Alexander the Great. We always have three great paradoxes. One is Akbar the Great, one is Ashok the Great, and one is Alexander the Great. Somehow, none of them were great, but those history were given to me too. And for coming back to the architecture education, I was doing architecture based on the Western lines, and I was reading literature of modernism. Literature of modernism, because we architects read a lot about art movements, modernism, postmodernism. They are somehow a part of our curriculum. And when you read it and you have got interest in reading more literature, then you will get exposed to what was the work of asymptotes. He spoke about deconstructivism. Then you will read about Derrida. Again, deconstructivism will come into play. And then further, when you start going backwards, you will get to know about what actually Lenin was thinking, what Marx was thinking. And I finished reading the Das Kapital in my college days, and I read the literature of Lenin, I read the literature of Stalin, whatever he wrote. And somehow I thought that, I am in the right position to bring the revolution. I will bring the revolution. This is what are not even, I was just approaching 20 that time. And I thought that I'll change the world and we should do something. And with this quest, I thought that perhaps it's the time to throw away the tradition. My hate for the tradition became more intense. And at the same time, that was a period when the Anna movement was kind of catching up. And the whole pitara of the Congress corruption was completely out. And somehow no one was with Congress that time. And everyone saw a crusader or a person who would fight for your right in Arvind Kejriwal. And I too fall in the trap. Again, I say it was a trap for me. And I started seeing him as a person who will change the whole thing and a lot more will happen. And with the time, I was also part of university education and all, like how normally you would expect a left-oriented person to do for the rights of students and many more things, which were not very which were not very right. When I look back at those time, I really see that somehow those steps were not in a very right direction. But now I was attracted toward Arvind Aam Aadmi Party, and also I had got intensified hate for BJP and Hindutva, and of course RSS was a body which I will hate to a core, because I had now grown up with the idea that RSS is an organization which is going to impose the idea of that time I used to call it Hinduism, idea of Hinduism upon the people. And if you impose the idea of Hinduism upon the people, then it means that you are trying to make country more like a very common phrase with the communists use, a Hindu Taliban or something. So this was even my idea that time, that this is what RSS is doing. I was worried that why a hospital shouldn't come on Ram Janmabhoomi site, and I always thought that something good should happen. Why people are fighting in the name of Ram if Ram was so good? And but as I got associated with Aam Aadmi Party, in fact, I became a volunteer for them. Then I had become fresh. I was fresh out of college, and I joined Aam Aadmi Party, and I did contribute my salary to Aam Aadmi Party as a volunteer, and that was a big thing because architects are paid very less to initiate with, and that too. But I was so confident about this man that I thought that if I can give a bit of mine into this movement, then maybe that something good will happen. But destiny had something else for me, and that time I joined a college as a research scholar. I was continuing my research, and I was also teaching students there. And being a faculty, I went with the student for a study trip to Ajanta and Ellora caves. And when I went to Ellora caves, I was flabbergasted by the scale, magnitude, and the precision and the amazing architecture what it was. Because before that we had just drawn it into the sketches in the history of architecture courses, and just for 10 odd marks, but we never knew that how intense this architecture actually is. When I was in the Kailasha temple, I was like, we are nothing in front of it. And I could just now trace back that if at all it was created so many years back, what genius those people were who created it. How much right now we struggle so much to get a basic design right, and here they were the people who cut the whole rock into such a beautiful, gigantic, I will say use the word gigantic also, because it's just so gigantic, it's so monumental in scale, and the precision is amazing. But that still was not a turning point. It was like, okay, fine, maybe that people used to do that time, because I always had an idea that okay, some technology would have been used for Ellora, but still it's not very deep science. This is what I was thinking till the time I was in Ellora. The moment from Ellora we went to Ajanta caves, that brought the real change in me. Because once you get into the Ajanta caves, and Ajanta cave complex is in a U shape in the plan, and it faces a river and it faces south direction. So when you step into any of the cave, you will see that after you walk further, then you step down. So generally in the cave architecture, you will step into the cave and you will walk upwards. But here it was, you have to step down. There were ditches inside the cave. And then again, like a curious student, I asked the guide that what it is, why the caves are for. Then he couldn't answer. But my curiosity didn't end there. In the evening, I got a chance to meet Professor Architect Deshpande, who's a local architect over there, and he's a genius of the traditional architecture. I asked him that, so why those dishes were there? Then he replied as, Abbas, those dishes were there to do the paintings. I asked to do the paintings, why? What the dishes have got to do with the painting? And then he said that, Abbas, it was done to generate light. Then again, I was like, light how? Why? Then he explained. He showed me one of the model, wherein he showed that in those ditches, those monks 2000 years back used to fill it with water, and because it faced south, and from the south the very intense sun rays come. The sun rays used to be incident onto the water, and that is how they used to generate light inside the cave to do the paintings. And I was like, wow, the so-called snail's law of reflection was being used by the monks whom we thought I always thought to be the foolish ones. And why they use this particular technique was also for a particular reason, that uh, because in the caves it was very dark and they used to have organic colors to do the paintings. Organic colors means the colors which come out of plants and flowers and those stuff. So if they would have used fire as a source of light, the paintings would have got eroded because of carbon. So they thought of getting light from the sun directly using the laws of reflection. And then that was a turning point. I collected as much book as I could from the ASI office in the front store rather. And when I got back, that led me, and there are footnotes in those books. Footnotes led me to the Buddhist literature. Buddhist literature led me to Upanishad. Upanishad to start with Puran, and Puran to I started with the Veda. And now the historical construct started changing for me altogether. I had understood that our traditionalists were genius scientists, the rishis, whom we call the each and every richa of Rig Veda or any Veda or anywhere, it had got a lot of logic and science. Like for example, if sun god is showed to be sitting on seven horses, it is not just that a man is sitting on the seven horses, but it was because horse is a sign of speed, and seven horses for seven colors of white light. So light travels at extreme speed, and light consists of seven different colors. The white light splits into seven colors when we pass it through the prism. So that was the understanding, and our understanding was always conserved in some sort of abstraction, and my urge to learn started increasing more and more, and then I started digging up in the history. But the transformation had happened. I was perhaps on a very righteous path, and in fact, I also read about Ram Janmabhoomi then, and I also understood very deeply what exactly Hindutva means. And these two readings, especially about Hindutva and Ram Janmabhoomi, even further brought very intense change in me. And I was convinced that Ram Temple must come over there. And of course, the Modi one was a big booster for me. In fact, not only I learned that how actually country should be run, but I also learned that what were the kind of the darkness I was living in about the particular political ideology, because I understood that whatever it may happen, Hindutva is the idea which is the core which will let the world run in a very humanitarian way in the times to come. If there is no Hindutva, then there's a lot of threat for the world, because the forces which we are around, they are going to gulp us big time. So that was the crux of my journey from being uh, falling under the trap of communism to coming out of the fold of the vicious left, in a very short summarized way, though it's a big journey. That's why I wrote a book on it.
This is fascinating, Abhasji, because you mentioned usually it takes lifetime for changing thought process and ideologies. You were quite young when you understood that this was a trap, and I like the way you kind of mentioned it as a trap. You mentioned about quite interesting stuff like sun god, how sitting on a seven horses and what it means in terms of seven colors and white and speed and etc. And how our rishis were scientists. They were not just backward superstitious persons, which is what the modern era shows us. In fact, I didn't know what about the sun god sitting on that. So thank you so much for explaining that. Maybe we'll have a separate session on that to understand a bit more in terms of Vedas and our rishis in a bit more. But something you mentioned in terms of Hindutva. In America, today we have a sad movement. They're trying to define Hindutva and Hinduism in a very cruel light. There's 2 days back I saw there's a book called Saffron Terror, I believe, in Amazon, written by Peter Friedrich. He's a communist. He's working with communists from India, trying to malign Hinduism and through Hindutva, saying that Hinduism is actually is against Islamist and minority community, and spreading tremendous amount of hatred on caste systems and our Hindu belief systems. So when you mentioned that when you were in college and later on you had an idea of how Hindutva, how much hatred you actually had within you against RSS and Hindutva, what would you tell our audience over here with that context that Hinduism is actually more liberal and leftist, if you would, and accepting of all and ideas, how do we go from what actually Hinduism is versus what someone like Peter Friedrich is trying to do?
So, as far as this guy Peter is concerned, I did had a spat with him on Twitter around a year back,
Okay.
and somehow he just jumped into some of my tweet, and because I don't generally go on to comment on people or write something, but he just jumped in and he said that something Nazi or something what he called, and then I gave a whole of a picture that how actually in reality forget about what ideologies are. Even if you look at the presidents somehow are very ugly for the Islamists on this ground, because the whole Arabian world of 1930s was gaga about Hitler. They were like, they were the praises for Hitler. They compared him with Prophet Muhammad. His pictures were put across on the streets of Baghdad, and people often said that he's an imam for us. When Muhammad Ali Jinnah wanted a corridor to pass between East and the West Pakistan, so that was a time when a journal in Pakistan, a Muslim League mouthpiece, compared compared Jinnah to be the Pakistani Fuad, or rather the Islamic Fuad. So the somehow it's very murky when it comes to the Nazism or the kind of fascism what they want to associate with, because if one reads into the history of Al Qaeda, if one reads into the history of ISIS, then somehow they all have drawn inspiration from Hitler, and the way his modus operandi has always been like a parameter for all these guys, and somehow communists now call what you say the Hindutva as a fascist, but Hitler's people themselves have quoted Stalin's ways to adopt to create the concentration camps for the Jews. So they were replicating the communists. So somehow those blame the Hinduism or the Hindutva to be fascist themselves have a very black past. This was about the president. Now, if we get into the logic or the ideology, then what happens is that there are two very popular terms. I will always say these two popular terms because both of them are relatively new. One is Hinduism and one is Hindutva. So Hinduism consists also of two words, and Hindutva also consists of two words. Hindu plus ism is Hinduism, and Hindu plus twa is Hindutva. Now, ism is a very popular idea which emerged into the West in 18th century, and this was added to any movement or any idea which they considered fringe that time, which was not very mainstream. So that's why you have feminism. So like that, many isms erupted that time. And when the Westerners came to India, they also saw that they always considered all the ideas to be like a cult. For them, Hindu idea was a very much like a cult because the practices were always seen in a bad light, like how India was always known as a land of only snake charmers, and how our Aghoris were always considered as a fringy people, fringe on the fringes side, the way they work and all. There were a lot of myths which were propagated about the Hindu Shastras, about how misquoted was Manusmriti under William Jones, and many things happened. So the perspective which they had made of Hinduism, or Hindu Dharma rather, was about of a very fringe and very non-mainstream ideology. So for them, it was easy to add the word ism. Now, when we add the word ism, then itself the thing gets very deconstructed, because ism is always about a singular idea. Like feminism will not have a lot of branches; it will always be a feminism. While on the contrast, if I say Naritva, Naritva will have a lot of facades. It can be about motherhood. It can be about how someone manages a family. It can also be about how good her managerial skill is in the corporate world. So Naritva can have multiple facades. It will not necessarily mean what feminism exclusively means. So that is what happens with Hinduism. When they added the word ism, it became an oxymoron because Hindu dharma encompasses a lot of broad ideas. There are many things. Astik and Nastik live together in the Hindu dharma. There is no clashes between the like how it is in the atheist and the theist, because these two differences are also very different. Like Astik is not the theist and Nastik is not the atheist. We have a very different way of working at it, and we don't go around with the issue that please do this for me or please do that for me. But Hindu dharma was always about just trying to find the Ishwar. You will not get a Ishwar straight away. It will not be like we always have a deity in front of us when we worship. But it doesn't mean that we are expecting deity to do something for me, and if we will not do this, then deity will do something wrong with us. Our whole construct of Ishwara was something very different. At how so now coming back to the kind of propaganda what Peter is trying to sell. It's more about there can be three reasons for it. Reason A, he knows nothing about Hindu Dharma as a starter. Second reason can be that I'm not claiming that either of the three would be the reason, but then these are the possibilities. The other reason is that he would be funded with anti-Hindu forces. Third reason could be that he is trying to sell the idea which is anti-Hindu. There cannot be any fourth reason to it, because anyone who has seen Hindu Dharma, I always say that you rightly said perhaps that it's more of the left, and if one goes back into the history that how left was created and right was created, one who was for democracy in France, they sat on the left side and they became the leftist, and one who were for the monarchy, they were on the right side. They were wanting, but our tradition or our conservative idea is not the conservative idea of the West. Our conservative idea was about getting more of a republican system, more of a democracy, because our past has been about if one looks into the history, there are Mahajanpadas, there are Janpadas. Their idea of a republic is existing from very long time. It goes to the it is in the it's enrooted into the Vedic culture. So the way the family structure also works, it's very democratic in nature. Everyone, like at times it's said that our Hindu idea of family system is very patriarchal. Patriarchal. This is what even Peter would have said. I don't know what he has claimed about the Indian family values, but he would have targeted these two. But if one looks closely, then he will find that the Indian family system is very much of a democratic in nature. As far as then he would target the caste system, then he would have targeted that how anti-minority the Hindu idea is. So as far as the anti-minority stand of a Hindu idea is concerned, had India been anti-minority, India was the only land which gave the place to the persecuted Parsis when they didn't find place anywhere. And India is the land, or these were the Hindu people who gave refuge to the people who persecuted certain people, and also we gave the place to those people who persecuted. Our motherland never differentiated between who else was being persecuted and who persecuted. So right now, if you look at the demography of India, it's very interesting. Somehow the Hindus don't carry the global plot of that we have persecuted anywhere, but we have encompassed a lot of civilizations which have a history of persecuting a lot of other civilizations. So to call us out that we are the fastest or we are whatnot, it will be very unjust to the history. The truth of a history is somewhere other ways around. So I suggest people to really look back into the history. And as far as the Hindutva is considered, Hindutva is the state of being Hindu. It's simply being that if I'm a Hindu, so I'm trying to be a Hindu, then it is Hindutva is what I am trying to practice. And it was my Hindutva only which gave the place to the Parsis. It was a Hindu nature itself, though the word didn't exist. If word didn't exist, it doesn't mean that there was no Hindutva. It was it, the nature of being Hindu. And also when Shivaji rose against the Islamic forces of the Mughals, it was also Hindutva, because dharma also teaches us to really fight the atrocities. We have seen a lot of atrocities. 40,000 plus temples were demolished. Today also one of our great monument, Qutub Minar, stands with the inscription written upon that how many temples were broken down. And then they have audacity to ask us that we are fundamentalist and whatnot. So somehow the construct of their idea is very flawed. It may be for any of the three reasons. But people, I hope that the young ones should be more interested in getting to the truth than really beating around with the propaganda selling around. If they just pick, like if they pick the book of Mughals themselves, what Mughals wrote about themselves, then they will find that we did not need a Hindu writer to defame Mughals or something. Like Akbar himself calls himself Ghazi, and though we call him Akbar the Great. So these kind of propagandas can really can be flushed down if people pick the right link of a history and pick the precedents in the right way and the right order.
Yeah, for Peter, specifically speaking, he is actually involved in anti-CAA resolutions that's happening over here. Initially, it started in February in the city of Seattle in Washington. He's working very closely with Shrama Sawant to and pass through this anti-CAA resolution, which has gone nationwide, specifically pushed through Democrat Party, which is basically in an equivalent of Aam Aadmi Party and Congress and CPIM, AIMIM, DMKs, TMCs of India. Basically, all left-leaning parties. And recently, the Shiv Sena, which has completely turned around and become a leftist party, more appeasement kind of ideology. So, one thing I'm trying to understand from a perspective of how communism is so attractive for young people. As you mentioned, you kind of answered it quite nicely before, but I want to deep dive into it because in America today, this brainwashing and indoctrination is not just happening in colleges. It's happening in schools, in teenage schools, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, as well as in the lower grades, primary schools. Unfortunately, we're dealing with a system and a society where a president-elect Joe Biden is okay with a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old doing a sex change. We are also dealing with a society where in a public library, there are drag queens who are teaching young children. Literally, I'm talking about 6, 7, 8-year-old. We are also dealing with folks climate change issues, which is they are taking into it's 12 and 13-year-old kids are on the streets for climate change issues. We're also dealing with where college students are literally trying to burn America's flag here. Plus, they're also against America's establishment. We have a House representative in America from Minneapolis today, Ilhan Omar, Islamist, who's out in the open saying she wants to dismantle America. So we're dealing with that kind of situation. You mentioned earlier that you were attracted to communism because you wanted to change the world. And when we are young, we want to change the world. That's the kind of mentality we come up with. We are very energetic. We want to literally go into revolution mode. Tell us a little bit more in terms of after 70 years in India, after going through such devastation of Hinduism and changing the entire equation of where majorities have actually become minority, India couldn't erase communism as of yet. What do we do in colleges and schools to make sure that children are not indoctrinated like this? And it's happening over here, it's happening in India, it's happening in any democratic country.
So communists have always had the same funda, which I recommend to everyone, because often people blame me or rather say that your ideas are very much on the communist lines, or perhaps they can work as a cure too. I always say that the communists work on the idea catch them young, and it all starts with a young age. And the way they propagate their ideas, it's very attractive to the young folks or who is just into the teenage, because there are two three reasons for it. Because somehow especially those who are blamed or called to be the conservative, especially in India, they actually are not conservatives, and they are the one who can be prone to any kind of idea which is out of the tradition. Because I come from a family where, of course, I said that there are people who go to who are communists and also with the RSS background, but still, all the festivals were celebrated with a lot of fervor, a lot of enthusiasm. No puja was missed. I spent my childhood listening to Ramcharitmanas by my dadi, and then my dad would also tell me a lot of stories. But still, they never had an impact on me because they were missing on the link, which should have been there for the young ones. Perhaps we lost uh, the kind of intensity with which the people used to do it in the past. Their explanation was very scientific in nature. Like in my childhood, I was never answered that why there are seven horses for the sun god or the sun Surya, whatever. But I got to know it when I started reading about it. I got to understand a lot about the essence of Hindu religion, or Hindu dharma rather, from the writings of a lot of physicists of the West. Our tradition merged very much with the scientific fervor and with the scientific temperament. We will need to ensure that it all starts changing at the school level, because we always blame that somehow colleges are or the academic places are very left leaning or very much oriented toward the communist ideas. We need to understand one thing, that this world is a market, and this work on only one principle. Everyone wants to make certain amount of profit, everyone. So you have to have the dynamics between the buyer and the shopkeeper in the right order, in the right direction. If a school kids themselves come out of a school where their understanding of the traditional values of India, if I talk in perspective of India, is very clear that what the traditional values was. Like if a poem was written, like uh, there are many shlokas of the past which have been composed, which will look just like a poem, a Sanskrit poem to the Westerner, but they are having intense mathematical formulas embedded to it, like the Fibonacci series, what we talk about today. Fibonacci himself had not called it a Fibonacci series. He attributes it to some rishi in India, but we call it Fibonacci series. That's our irony. We need to rename it to Pingala series, Rishi, based on Rishi Pingala. So when Rishi Pingala wrote the Chanda Shastra, when he was dealing with it, there he explains that what is the beauty of what is the beauty of the number system. He's explaining number system, but those number system became the base of our classical music. The Fibonacci series is base of a lot of. It's a beautiful sequence, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, and it's a beautiful sequence that way. It's also called it's a golden ratio. But the children are not aware that someone so great called Pingala was living 2000 years back. He knows that it was Fibonacci who gave us this beautiful proportion, though Fibonacci himself is not accepting it. Now, when a student is taught calculus in standard 10 or matriculation, or when they go a bit higher, then even if it's not part of a curriculum, it needs to be taught that it was Madhavacharya who laid a very strong foundation for the calculus, which was later on used by Lambis and the Newton, which got formulated into final calculus. We can't forget the work of Aryabhatta, which was also happened to become the basic of the calculus in the world. We Indians are the first one to calculate the most precise circumference of the Earth. I say most precise. I'm not talking that people will come with a recruit exterior first, but ours was the most precise one. So we have had a lot of beautiful values in our system. When I say value, it means a scientific temperament. Our whole thought process, each and every shloka, were about some scientific revelation. It was not about that God is doing something or that, but it was more about what science is speaking about. So perhaps we Hindus have been the people who have and can live a life even without something godly around. We have seen science as a god for us. Even Ishwar is like a giant atom, if I say, and there's when we say Brahmand is Brahm is a large and represent an oval form. So it's a large oval form. So our whole system has been about understanding the cosmos, the world in a very right order. So these teachings need to go to the school student. So even though when in the college time, when these things are not the part of curriculum, students start asking these things because the school teachers have given them enough, to understand their civilization. So when this shop, when the people who are going to buy themselves are open to buy only the traditional ideas or rather the right idea, then even they will start selling what is required. So we need a lot of working at the school level. And once these things start happening, the things will change, because I do believe that no one has a bad intention to do something good. I still often people blame me that you indulge on Twitter with just anyone, but I'm a very hopeful guy. I don't feel bad for anything, even if someone abuses me or something. I have a lot of hope from everyone. I always see that maybe a dialogue could happen, maybe something can change. I still live with the belief that at the end of the day we all are humans, maybe something can happen. But if we don't do work at the ground level, at the school level, there will be no point blaming that colleges are captured by the leftist or those things. Because right now we also produce students like me who was in my childhood, that who wanted to know more about the West, who was more interested in making my design look more of a something on a beach of Greece than it's coming something on the beach of Mahabalipuram or something. So uh, it's all depends on who the buyers are. So we need to change the way the schools operate largely.
So you mentioned you want to have a dialogue. Now we are living in a society where dialogue is not a option anymore. The leftists don't have a dialogue. They have an indoctrination. Either you believe it or not. It's almost like one of those aspect of you have two options: convert or die. If you don't convert, or you are going to die. So how do you have a dialogue? How do you have a dialogue when we are talking about indoctrination coming in America today, in terms of the coronavirus? The leftists, the Democrats are pushing believe in science, believe in science. So what is happening here? Dr. Fauci flip-flopping completely from left and right and constantly changing his views. One time mask works and another time it doesn't work. You have to have lockdown, you have to have social distancing. If you look at the numbers, world numbers, United States had the worst hit of coronavirus. Most of the top 10 states, if you take a look at it, they're all Democrat states. And it's not like they have been Democrat for, for past 4 years, 6 years, or 10 years. For decades, I'm talking about, they have been ruled by leftist parties. And they are the one who didn't take any kind of uh, advices and recommendation came from President Trump. And they are focusing on one message: believe in science. And who are the scientists? Dr. Fauci. And what is Dr. Fauci is doing? Flip-flopping constantly. Now, when we talk about science, Hindus, as you specifically mentioned, Hindu rishis, Hindu history, heritage is all based on science. But the same Hinduism today is being mocked and shamed and threatened everywhere in the world, including the land of Hindus, which is India. How do we change that narrative? We're not against science, as you said. Our philosophy is based on science, and medicine. Shushruta is installed as the guru of medicine in Australia. We actually discovered trigonometry, algebra. You talked about Fibonacci series. we are the one who invented chess and buttons. What do we do, and how do we bring this kind of thought process in science, not losing the traditional values and the conservatism to this world?
See, because we spoke about how the left is very much on the line of Abrahamic faiths. So that's the truth. And because we have spoken it, so I'll put a bit of light on a fact that generally it's thought that Marxists are very pro-science, but their history has been very anti-science. In fact, whole of Russia was against Albert Einstein because he was talking about quantum physics. And Lenin wrote a very important book, which became a doctrine of Russia, that or rather the Soviet Union, that how the science needs to be accepted. And they were completely against modern physics, because what this modern physics was doing, this was breaking their idea of dialectic materialism and dialectic determinism. Marxism works only on two principles, that is dialectic materialism and dialectic determinism. So anything, it's very much focused on the man, and as a human do everything. There's nothing beyond the scope of human. Everything has to be very humanly. And this, when modern physics popped in, it kind of felt very inhuman to them, and it felt that how can we talk about so many dimensions, and how can we say that there's a time when there's a place where time and all the dimensions just merge together. So the theory of uncertainty, and there were many things which were popping in. Though further, even theory of uncertainty can be questioned now. So science progressed with the time, but they were very anti to it, and this was a particular reason that no one tries to know that why USSR, though being so active in World War, never tried to make atom bomb. They were not looking to make atom bomb because their scientists, the panel of scientists, were not agreeing to the modern physics. And without modern physics, you cannot make the atom bomb. And it was in the very last phases when Stalin agreed for it and said that whatever it may be. So they changed the stand. Stalin was one of our very, I can say, a very practical Marxist or a very practical Leninist who just wanted that. And there's a statement, recorded statement also, that okay, fine, we will shoot them later. So he was okay to shoot. So it was a kind of a very fatwa kind of system, that if you are agreeing with the modern physics, or if you are not following the principle of dialectic materialism and dialectic determinism, you will be persecuted. So Marxism, according to me, is just one more leg of the Abrahamic faith, wherein, but the difference, where the difference comes is that it just happened in 19th century, and so people won't consider it to be religion or something. But for me, it's a religion where the main prophet was Karl Marx, and then his caliphs came in form of Lenin and Stalin and what so on, and we have more caliphs in various parts. We have Sitaram Yechuri in India and whatnot. So all these caliphs have tried to impose the idea of the doctrine which Mr. Marx wrote. Now, interestingly, if one looks the behavior of China very closely, China, okay, China is a communist country. I don't have any high regard for China that way, but I will like to say that China deviated from Marx said. So that's why if you see that this society flourished a lot more than any other communist land. When Mao took over, and in 1949, his whole idea of making a new China was based on certain modification to what Marx was thinking. He made it very ethnic centric ideology, where he connected with the masses and the people of the China, and he kind of got this idea that this Chinese factor was very important, while the global factor was very important for all other communists. They thought of no border, but these guys, Chinese, were always Mao and person to follow. They were always had the idea that Chinese border what matters to them, and they will expand. And they get it somehow in their blood, because China has always been an expansionist land. So, so China has altogether a very different story. These Russian communists have a very different story. And yes, the failure of communism is also again altogether a very different story. But what they did, they have found a place in academics everywhere. And they found a place in academic because if I take the case of India, then most of the people who were traditionalists or who never had any very strong political affiliation as such, they were busy building their career. Like my father was not interested in politics, but he was more interested in that he need a career, and he was not bothered that what the communist guys are doing or something else is going up. And in fact, this was more of a for a middle class and lower middle class, or even for higher middle class, to really position yourself in a very right place, and then we'll see that what happens to history and politics. It would come very later. Have been very till very recent times that people have been very negligent about politics and history. So what happened that while we were busy doing the job, and I don't have any biases for any other stream or something, but yes, middle class had a lot of focus, especially on studying science, because they thought that either if you become an engineer or doctor, then it's a flourishing career, and if you move towards the humanities, then maybe that things will not work in a very right order for you. So my father is a historian, so he says a tale that it was very tough to convince the people around when he was studying history. But again, this history was no one knew that what is happening into the inside the history colleges. Like if my father will return back and he starts something, then my parents are his parents won't be that bothered that what was taught and what the things were. His academic is separate; it has nothing to do with the regular life. But now, on the contrast, if you see a communist family, for them, what they study is a part of their life. This is what happens in the discussion of a dinner table or something. So it always walks alongside with them. So, and all the elite one of that time, of that era, were somehow moving towards humanities. And when you have all the resources around you, everything is working fine, then you feel that, oh, chalo, ab duniya badalte hain. And this is when the idea of communism gets embedded into the minds very strongly. That when you at times lack in responsibilities, when you see that the ground is well settled for you and everything, you are playing on a very smooth wicket or the turf is too good for you, then you always have feel that chalo aaj kuch kar denge. And this was happening with most of the people in the age of 80s and beyond. So those era got embedded while many people towards traditional ideas got embedded into the scientific fields. Those people captured the academic stream in humanities. So they themselves then, because it happened in 80s and around after JNU got created and things. So then in the span of 3-4 decades, their extent into the humanities has been massive, because we were busy making ourselves engineers, scientists and whatnot, but they were trying to make a very good foundation for the social engineering. So they somehow spread very well enough into the field of the academia. And as far as when I said about the dialogue, but you rightly said that the dialogue is a very one-way traffic right now. But despite when I say dialogue with, I don't want to have any dialogue with Romila Thapar because, or anyone of that way, because I know that they have a certain way of working and they have certain rules set by people they work for, whatever it may be. But I want to have dialogue with the young minds. I want to have dialogue with the people, the youth. Like India still constitutes of a lot of young people. We need to increase more and more dialogue. Like people need to get into more of a writing. People need to get into more of the podcast and things. I see that how we can reach to maximum youth, because I am convinced that youth will not blindly take up anything. You tell them the truth, the things will start changing. And as I said, that we are lucky enough, especially in India. I don't have demographics of America with me right now, but what I understand that Indian demographics is something like that. It's about the young people, and they are the people who are going to buy the products. We need to reach to them. We need to really flush out whatever the poison is within them. Let them get the truth. More and more books need to be written. And I'm not a very big critic of government as such, but I am very sorry to say that somehow when it comes to promoting the literary works, there have not been a lot of emphasis that Like while the next election comes in India, there would be at least 25 odd books which would be written against how this whole era of 5 years went. But from our side, perhaps we will not have, even if we will have book, our books will not get the kind of promotion what those guys get. Because even if some small portal is created by some left-leaning people, then Rahul Gandhi would tweet about it and say that, this has happened. Because it favors the ideology which he's against it. So somehow I won't say it's about ecosystem or something, but the people who are operating the governmental levels need to see that how really this vicious thing of communism is really fought out. Dialogues will pass through literature, dialogues will pass through the vlogs. When I say vlogs, video blogs and things like that. There is no other way out. I don't see anything anyway around to fix the system.
You see, you're talking about writing, podcasts, maximum reaching to the students and the young minds and through blogs and etc. We are living in the age of YouTubes and Facebook and Twitter. Today, we live in the age where Twitter is silencing President of America. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is something to think about. That
Yeah.
this is a company which was given enough leeway and freedom in the country, and these particular organizations like Twitter and Facebook, they're not even operating and open in China or Iran, but they have their leaders speaking and spewing venom in the platform, and from the country they belong to originally, they're silencing the president and the top political positional holder. So this, how do we get to that? Today my Facebook account is flagged, my Twitter is flagged, I'm sure YouTube is going to be flagged pretty soon. Wikipedia is spewing venom against Hindus and conservatives. You can't even actually change anything in there. If you do, it gets reverted back. We're talking about academia, as you mentioned. It's completely leftist. Recently, I went back to school to finish my master's degree. I went to the best college I could go possibly in the vicinity I live in. And I was blown away by the thing that I have noticed over there in terms of the communism, in terms of the leftism, and how most conservatives are getting shut down in the academia. And that's the places where you're supposed to be free in terms of thought process. You're supposed to be free in terms of your ideas. We get it shut down. So how do we even bring out? I mean, these new the platforms that we have, Rumble and etc., Parlor and etc., the interfaces are not really that sophisticated. It's not that it hasn't taken off in terms of improvement. Slowly by
So
slowly, every platform is moving towards the leftism. There was a news channel here, I call it quote unquote was because it was because until recently, this Fox News channel was a conservative based channel.
yeah.
Most of us, we used to watch that. Today, it's no longer conservative. It's filled with Hillary Clinton and Obama's surrogates, and it is completely against nationalism, completely against President Trump. So how do we even message it? You mentioned about book writing. It's not going to get the publishing. It's not going to get the publicity that we are looking for. So how do we reach the youth? How do we communicate the ideas when these leftists don't even want to hear us and want to blacklist us?
See, as far as social media is concerned, it again is operating. It's about the market. For me, it's always about, like, if I look for the statistics of Twitter, the amount of Twitter user we have, and if we just start getting into the checking that how the, even if we look at Twitter as a world and we divide into demographics, then we will understand that the more people on Twitter who are non-conservative, or rather, I must say that they are more towards borderless world or what not. The stupid people, I always say them, because they talk about borderless world, but they can't even afford to have borderless home. So they will, of course, they will have compound wall in the house and paint over and things like that. So this borderless concept is completely crap. But yes, the demographic is as such. We need to increase the numbers of people using the platform. And as you rightly said about the new platforms, I don't call ourselves mediocre, but I always say that we are in rush to do a lot of things. Because, for example, if say some parliamentarian writes a book, then he doesn't talks about it at all. But when the book comes, it's a boom. It's it is well spoken about, and a lot of issues are addressed. So what we at times do is that even in terms of social media creation or the alternative platform creation, we have been in a lot of rush. And yes, it was initially it was Orkut. Orkut was killed by Facebook. Facebook was killed, has been killed by Twitter to a great extent. I would not killed, but it might take up in some time. The popularity in terms of the formal things are more for Twitter than Facebook. So social media come and they gallop the last one. And it happened, if Facebook can take over Orkut, why can't other one take over Twitter? They will also take over Twitter, but somehow we really need to work on with a lot of effort, with a lot of inputs getting into being of what exactly is a good thing. I might support media which comes out from the righteous side, but perhaps I might not be using it for the reason that of the user interface, as you said, or it may be that it might not even be able to make my words reach. So there are two, three things which are very key. I, being a designer, always emphasize that a design, you can be good at ideology, but your design cannot be sold until you have a very good science behind it. When I say science, it's working very well. There is no loopholes. Second is about marketing and publicity is very important. A third very important aspect is that how you really portray yourself. And the best idea of the platform, which are left leaning today, is that they have always called themselves neutral. So every platform which is coming up needs not decide from beginning that we are on this side. The moment you decide that we have got certain kind of border or we have got certain kind of color for ourselves, then it will directly filter out people. It acts as a filter. So somehow the reaction which I have seen for many social medias have been about, left has this social media, let's have our social media. Then first, what it does is that it crosses any chance of any dialogues. Because if there's a particular portal which is designated as this is leaning towards that, then only people, I will read it, you will read it. There's a portal which is declared that it's a left leaning, then but now, out of these, there are portal or their news agencies or their social media or whatever, they incline to left, but they have never shown their stand. They have been trying to put it, they have been monkey balancing it quite well. So we need to have this act of monkey balancing, or rather, I must say that the platform should be open to each and everyone. There should not be any identity associated with any platform. So any reactionary idea doesn't have a life. Idea needs to be unique in itself. Twitter sold more than Facebook in terms of the formality because it was Twitter. It was not a reaction to Facebook, I would say. Facebook sustained because it was not a reaction to Orkut, but it was Facebook. So we need to have a very virgin, very new kind of idea. If we, even if I have a mind that I want to create an alternative for our people, I first need to think that how, as a designer, I bring a design which, if I say that I, as a writer, now think that hey, I want to write this book, but what if my book doesn't come on a bookshelf? Will it make any difference or not? So when I'm able to conclude that, that gives me an idea that how significant my product is. So that is what we need to strive for. It's more of a, I think, design-based problem. I'm not doing any bias being a designer or something, but it's a really a design-based problem which people are not approaching it as a designer, but it's more of a reaction. Reactions won't help. So it's very important that we get quality, we get enough marketing and publicity, and we show that, or rather, it must platform must come which is shown as a neutral at least. It doesn't have any side or color.
Interesting what you mentioned. It almost reminds me of Steve Jobs in terms of design. I think that you mentioned he had a neck of design, he had a prettiness of it, and the balance of it. He literally changed the entire world with a simple device. It's pretty, it's beautiful, it's sleek, it's modern, but he also had the the foundation behind it, which is the marketing and etc. And it's look at the amount of profit it generates. Fascinating.
Yes.
Now, to work on that architectural aspect of your experience, I know a lot of community activists are working in terms of history, but what we don't naturally see is, you talk about Taj Mahal, we talk about Qutub Minar. Those are the things that we know as even foreigners go, they are the one who's looking at those. But as an Indian, we don't talk about our own ancient architecture. Kailash temple you mentioned, or we are not taught about the thousands of years ago the temples were built in certain ways and they had some energy. That's why you used to go to temples. And how all the way you will go to the major sanctum, and there is a process going into that. What is your thought process in there, and what do we do now to change the narratives that look, Mughals really didn't build Taj Mahal. It's just a tomb. Secondly, the during the time it was built, there was a Deccan famine, and thirdly, Mughals, if they were so enriched in terms of their architectural ability, why didn't they build something in the Middle East at that time? Why India? And the concept that Mughal India is all about Mughals, and they are the one who enriched us versus what we lost because of them. That conversation never happened. So bring your architectural thought process into that and tell us what we can do to change the narrative.
See, this again is a very interesting question, I must say, because somehow we have always been tied up with history in isolation, politics in isolation, but somehow we have failed to amalgamate the things and see that how design is really building a society. What happens is that I often say that we, as a human being or even an animal who passes across a structure every day, that structure can have an impact on him, which would have changed his whole life, and perhaps he will not notice it. Such is the power of design. So, and that is how even you mentioned Steve Jobs. That is how Steve Jobs also looked at the design. There was no compromise in terms of how a design needs to function. Now, somehow our designs or the architecture which we live in is very much influenced by the non-Indian ideas. When I say non-Indian ideas, it starts off with that there was a time when, if we go back to our memory lane of childhood and things, we will notice that you know, at times when the children are alone at a home, the neighbor would be told that you please take care of them, and that neighbor would be that it can be any neighbor. Some five houses, even a kilometer distance was not a problem for the neighbor. That time the neighbor would walk down, because at times vehicles were not very frequent, to that house, stay with the children for the night, and then again go back to his home in the morning time. So that is how the Indian society was about. And Indian society, so still now, if something wrong goes to you, the things have changed though with the time in the cities. Something goes wrong, some accident or something happens, the people will surround you and they will be there to help you around. In India, it used to happen, but things have changed. So the character of people has also got non-Indianized. it has become very, humility has been minimal. People have no empathy, and people have walked out of the way how Indians were long back. Like how Megasthenes describes about India, that there was no slavery, no one was slave. People say that there was slavery in India too, but India didn't had any slavery. There have been writings by the Chinese that India is a strange land where people don't close their doors. So what it was about, the you could so when I so despite that, I'm not seeing how the image of India is, but the description of India is making you feel that what character of a land is about and how the architecture would have been. Now, if I look outward from this perspective, what happens is that our design ideas are somewhat not reflecting to those characters, because our character is not somewhat what it was long back. We don't have, I as a house designer, even if we don't go to, at times people even think that when we'll talk about a temple architecture or so that, but our Indic architecture was so much concentrated to the human civilizational value that like I spoke to you that about the whole neighborhood concept, how it existed. And India, if we start designing a house, I say that if I design a house and I have a place in the front where I take care that a milkman who delivers some milk to me, he always get a chance to, if he has to wait and some kind of a good sitting space is there for him. He also is a user of my space, and maybe that outside my compound wall, I have created some spaces where if a person is walking down, he can rest, he can sit over there. So when I start interacting with my design with the people, my idea starts becoming Indian very much, because India was a society where it cared for people. India was a society which had humility. So our design needs to speak that way. So the moment my house becomes a storehouse, or rather a place where everyone who passes in front of my house starts getting some usability out of it, starts getting some kind of connection with it. At times it happens from the childhood. If again go back to the childhood memory lane, then there must be some houses where you would have collected something that used to do something there, and how the things were very much related. The sense of landmarks are missing in Indian architecture right now. We have now landmarks in form of some kind of shopping mall, or it may be some kind of theater or something, but there is not very, you don't see a Sharma ji ka house as a landmark anymore. It has changed. There was a time when I used to say that my neighbor was uh, I used to say that Pandey Dadaji ke ghar ke baad ka wo cheez hai. So we used to always call Pandey Dadaji, Sharma uncle, Sharma chacha, or the whole thing. So this relationship with the landmark, and the houses of the people used to be the landmark. The way the sabji mandi. So I don't mean to say that I want the architecture to go back to that time, but the character needs to be brought back. And we need to dismantle the model which West applied, which they are dismantling right now. Because, like for example, the shopping mall ka boom hua. There was a lot of boom of the shopping malls that you get everything, and it was an air-conditioned space, so everyone cherished. But now, what has happened with the coming of the virtual online shopping rather? So these malls have become experience centers. You go to mall to check out the size and the things, but you at times purchase the things from the online stores, because of course the market is different, the prices are different. So what they have started doing, the malls have started curtailing the ACs. Now they are open malls. Open mall is again the system what India used to have, when Sabji Mandi used to sit with a courtyard in the center. So we are going back to it. It's though it's happening because of AC costing more to them, but it is happening. So now what it has done is that, of course, the natural air ventilation, which was a major concept of whole Indian architecture that time long back, it is back. It has brought in more of open space, and now people are expressing more on creating more of plazas. Like if one looks at Patliputra of the past, Patliputra was known for its riverfront development, and it had again the mention comes in Megasthenes Indica, where he explains about the how the Patliputra riverfront development was done. So those plaza are coming back, and we need to get more of them, which becomes an interactive spaces. Like If we look at the Europe, Europe is very functioning very much how it used to function in the past. If one goes to Paris, the squares of the Paris with the cafes and the people sitting around is very much same as what it was. But we have changed. The French people never changed in terms of how their civilization worked. Only buildings changed, but the character is still same. Every because night comes very late in France because of the time zone and the things. But still, you will see that once you walk down in 5 in the evening, 6 in the evening, people are collaborated together. They're talking. A lot of community-based things are happening. So this I spoke just in terms of urban design, that how we can get back the Indian values into that space planning and things. Then, of course, we need to embed the idea of the local materials. Local building materials needs to be used so that it not only gives boost to the local market and local people get employment, and of course, when you don't transport a lot of material, you reduce on energy. And when you reduce on energy, because I am not a buyer of an idea that alternative energy can save you, because alternative energy you need to conserve if you want to grow. These methods of local building material will really reduce on a lot of things, and at the same time it will talk about what India was about, because in the past, when how if you go to different regions of India, all the houses of the old times are built in a very different way. It was because of the local materials, local tradition, and so those kind of characters needs to come in back in. We need to pick the local material. We need to speak about the techniques adapted to the climate, especially like you'll have different, how you can have same building in Rajasthan and same in Karnataka. They need to be very different. But now you see that I can do the same building in Karnataka, which I have done in Rajasthan. So they are not respecting climate anymore. We need to start respecting climate because India is a diverse land. So when people will travel from here, Rajasthan to Karnataka, then a curious kid will always have the question why it is this way. Then the people will explain that Rajasthan aisa hai, and the things are so different there. Then they will speak about Karnataka, they will speak about Maharashtra, how different it is. So architecture gives you scope to even explain the diversity of the places, and that is what India was about. And of course, then coming back to the our religious places, or rather dharmic places, they need to come back more strongly. Still, the morning needs to be the time when everyone wakes up with the Vedic rituals. The morning prayers, Vedic rituals were very important for a person to wake up. It has stopped anymore. You will not read Vedic rituals anymore. We have these things are just getting away, and the temple as an ecosystem, or rather as a market economy, need to come up again, because temples were a great economic place. It used to have employment, and the whole economic cycle used to revolve around temples, right? Because the kind of donations what used to give, right now it's all with the government, forget it. But when actually that time it used to be with the king, and when the people used to go for money or something, they never there was no process of lending. They were given directly. It is your money, use it and return back. So these all things are documented too, so no one has had any shortage of money any time. Like if you have some more money today, you will put it into the temple. Tomorrow I have lesser money, I will take it from the temple and I will return back again. So the whole system was so very much organized, and it was working so well. And this is what architecture is about, the whole urban design, how it comes across. So more than the technicalities of a temple, even if we are able to focus on these basic things, how Indians used to live the life, but definitely with the modern facilities around, which are required very much, then the system will be in a right order. And perhaps it will be good for even world to grow.
It's interesting what you mentioned in terms of how Indians have changed and adopted a foreign cultures to fit in. Looks like it reminds me of the good old village stays, right, where the houses used to be made with bamboos and tin and muds. Now the villages are a hodgepodge of buildings and cements and bricks, and some here it just doesn't have the aesthetics of purity. It's a hodgepodge of everything. The villages are not towns, They're not villages, they're stuck in the middle, like it just lost all sort of natural aspect of the connection with the nature. So interestingly, what you mentioned in terms of how to how to bring it all back to the our today's topic of communism, it looks like it's the crux of it is hating the tradition, hating the history, hating the heritage. So whether you take India as an aspect, how we lost connection with the Gurukulas, how we lost connection with temples. You talked about temples are under the government control. Interestingly, the churches are mosques and are not in the control of government. So it's all one way, quote unquote, lopsided secularism that India is propagating against the Hindus. This is happening here in United States. If you're a Christian and a white person, you have more chances of getting attacked than you are a brown person who's me, sort of like that. But I get attacked not because I'm brown, but I'm conservative. So it's all about the aspect of communism and their indoctrination of either you are part of us. If you are not, we're going to shame you, we're going to threaten you, we're going to intimidate you, we're going to blacklist you, you are outcast of the society. That's kind of the situation we are up against, unfortunately, in the United States. You, as an Indian, have given us a tremendous amount of information, and this dialogue is going to continue. And it's not the end of it. There's so much things to talk about. I really want to talk about the crux of how Islamism actually works with communism and later on kicks communism out and takes over. That could be a secondary topic. We'll talk about it another time. I'll also want to talk about some of those aspects, as an architect in terms of Vastu Shastra you mentioned before, the science of what should be where in the houses and which direction it should follow. Unfortunately, we as a Hindus are looked upon as superstitious, a cult, as you mentioned, but we see a lot of science in there. And that's something that I think is quite important and crucial for us as a Hindus to bring out to the world, to the broader audience, for them to understand that whichever you are calling us as a cult and uh, backward and uneducated, we are the one who brought you the civilization. We are the one who are the carriers of the oldest living civilization of the entire world. And I was just looking at Varanasi, how Varanasi is the oldest city of the world. And then when I was looking at and researching at it, I found a lot more information about how there are more articles about more ancient cities in Turkey and Israel and etc. But there is no mention about Varanasi. So I think it's
Yeah.
time for us to rewrite the history. It's time for us to talk about the reality that for generation has been hidden from the rest of the world, including Indians in India. So I think with that, I've taken a tremendous amount of time from you. This continuous discussion must happen. And I do appreciate for you to be with us today. You've given us tremendous amount of information about communism and what the danger of communism is and how you and actually looked for the truth. Glad that happened to you very quickly and in a short time. I know this is a a phase. It takes about a lifetime plus for anybody to go through, but you are perhaps one of the fortunate one that has quickly switched and understood what is the truth. So thank you so much for all you do. Thank you so much for being with us. And I Exit is an initiative. We are trying to inspire and also bring inspiring stories to Indian Americans to help moving them from the leftist ideology to the conservative platform. Basically, in crux, we want to show the connection of violence in the world with the communism and the leftist side, and how Hinduism is actually more liberal than anybody could think. Thank you so much, Aabhas ji. I really, really
Thank you.
appreciate your all knowledge and thought process that you shared with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Glad to be here.